pre-meta transactions and that type of thing.
Cool. My name's Tom. I also work with Tensorem with Mark and Moritz. So basically, like everyone else, looking to see how we can abstract, through meta transactions, make the UX experience much better.
Right, guys. My name is Moritz. I'm also from Tensorem, and basically, what we realize, as Mark as Tom says, that if we want to onboard the mainstream, like we have to somehow abstract all the blockchain layer, and people have to interface with the technology that we're building without actually having to understand the technology that we're building. So we work on similar things as Gnosis say for the multisig and on the delegate transactions, and then we realized that the coolest way to actually build this is like to try to create this decentralized layer where you just submit your transactions and then the transaction gets executed in the pool. So that's fundamentally the primary thing that we work on right now, how to create this decentralized layer of like executing meta transactions.
Hi everyone, I'm Jean from Consensus. We've been working recently on a couple of use cases where meta transactions were interesting, and I want to learn like the best practices on the subject at the moment, and yeah, that's why I'm here.
Hi, my name is Godfrey. I work at Linea, and we're building a data protocol. One of the things like onboarding and scaling seemed like meta transactions would be a good solution. So I'll learn more about that.
And I'm Carsten from Civi, and we're trying in practice how it's like to, let's say, onboard people in 10 seconds, being able to receive tokens, send tokens through, for example, links to messaging apps, and basically trying out meta transactions in practice. I'm interested in both standardization around the space and also the economic models, because in the end somebody has to pay the bill for the transactions, and how do we deal with those? Yeah, that's basically it.
Hi, I'm Dan Burnett. I'm on the standards team at Pegasus within Consensus. And hey, I'm just all for anything that makes this easier for normal people. And we are not normal people.
Hi, I'm Igor from Right Mesh. We are building mesh networks, and to be specific, we integrate payment channels in our system. And we're also looking to make the life of our users easier. This is what we ask on the meta transactions.
Awesome. I'm George. I'm part of LimeChain, and most notably for this ring, I've worked closely with AVSA and Marek on the Universal ID SDK, which basically is like 90% the same things that we're going to be talking here. And I'm curious to just learn what you guys are like up to, whether I can share any knowledge, and yeah, just see what's the future.
Hey, I'm Justin. I'm working on a project called At Stake, and I'm interested in using meta transactions to improve usability, and in particular about whether there can be like a network of relayers, so we don't have to centralize relaying meta transactions.
Hey, I'm Lucas from Consensus. I'm mainly here because I have curious about what you guys are going to be talking about, and I'm working on security tokens at the moment.
Yeah, so my name is Alexis. I'm working at Consensus as well. So we're basically all working together, and yeah, same.
And I'm Julian, Consensus Solution Paris 2, and we are involved on many different projects with startups, some on sidechains, some on mainnet, and yeah, of course interested on meta transaction to improve the UX with end users.
Anyone else? Okay, cool. The point of today is essentially we have many different people working on implementations of meta transactions, either for their own Web3 project or people working on the infrastructure level. I'd like to focus our discussions today on how can we help each other. Essentially, what initiatives can we run to help each other achieve what we want to achieve collectively on our own projects, but also within the community. And I would love to throw this up in the air, but I feel like it's come down to two focuses at the moment. It's come down to how do you implement meta transactions, and also how do we use it. One is focused on the technical aspects in terms of this specific standard and the standard interaction between other standards, right? Of the 1077 identity contract and its interaction with, say, the ERC, a potential ERC that might come out of this group. and I guess our focus is UX one in terms of how do we use our meta transactions. I think we can gain from some interesting initiatives that we could potentially run, such as just quick user interviews on different teams and how and the problems they've encountered. But just to have more context, does anyone have any questions? Because otherwise I'm just going to give you some context on what the MetaCartel has been doing, what its timeline when it started, and what it looks to do in the near future, and its current activities right now.
Can you give a quick technical overview of exactly how meta transactions work?
Mark, you want to do that?
All right, cool. So, so there's many applications currently. So I think George, you can talk on one. Also, Sage, you can probably talk on yours, and how we currently talk on it. So with Tenzorum, we have the same idea of a personal multi-sig wallet. We're actually looking at the Gnosis Safe contract, but basically what we do is on sign up or on the onboarding journey for a user, you reach a point where you create a blockchain account. This can be done gaslessly, but the cost of it can become pretty enormous. But within this contract, you have the allowance of a bunch of keys to execute a function that basically transfers tokens from that contract itself. So that contract is the holder of all of the assets. So within that contract, you have to build out ability to transfer tokens, ability to transfer ether, non-fungibles, and kind of hard code everything into the smart contract to then allow it to transfer all its assets. But what that allows you to do is send a message on behalf of the account that has access to that smart contract, and send the signed message to a relayer to then execute the contract, execute that transfer on your behalf. And that is sent to a relayer. Currently, most of the implementations are central relayer. But Tenzorum's looking at the decentralized relayer network, I think Chronologic as well. Is there any room? We're looking at a decentralized network.
Pocket network as well.
What's that?
Ours is not.
Pocket network. Blockchain is something similar.
Yeah,
as well.
Blockchain is decentralized.
Groundhog as well. Yeah, Groundhog. Okay, cool.
So overall, it seems like it's a contract wallet with EC recovery built in.
Yeah. I don't know if anyone's building a proxy contract.
There's different in addition to that, so there's like bouncer proxy, but there's also like sort of the way that we utilize meta transactions for subscriptions is that there is this there's a contract that basically has like a execute and a cancel function, and you sign a message saying like, hey, I intend to give Scott $5 every month, and then I basically approve him some limit of an ERC20. And then that message acts almost like a check, where I can submit that transaction back to the chain at a given time interval, or a timestamp. And so that way the contract itself is not holding any value. All it's doing is calling the transfer from on behalf of myself so that I can pay Scott on a recurring basis. And then to end the subscription, basically I'm setting the approval to 0, and I'm calling the cancel subscription to make that signature invalid.
Can I add something just for Richard? So the important thing is like, you have this smart contract that is representing yourself, which is cool because in all transactions, basically the message sender for the other dApps is going to be your smart contract, but you have other wallets that actually have administrative privileges for somebody else to submit messages, and if we recover these messages to be signed by one of the administrative wallets, then the transactions can go through. And these people that are sending the signed messages are not necessarily the people that are signing them, which is the relayer network. And here we open one very cool Pandora's box, because now you need to refund them, otherwise they won't be willing to do this, or you will have a centralized network. So basically these are the two things. You have a contract that receives signed messages and executes stuff, and you have a relayer network that actually is submitting these messages toward your contracts. And these are, as Peter started talking, are like two of the main different points that the different teams are working on. Half of us are basically working on the smart contracts. How do you make it as safe as possible? How do, as he said, like making transactions, calling arbitrary data, making arbitrary calls. The other half of us are working on the relayer networks. How do you make a P2P network that is both safe in terms of game theory, and we don't give too much control to this network so that nobody can steal. So yeah, a lot of work ahead.
And one last quick question: is there any EIPs that list how these transactions should be formatted and etc.?
The format of the transactions, I think we're currently working on EIP. There is, I think, a couple of propositions for the identity contract itself, how it should work. I think it's 1067, 1066, something like this. Yeah, right. You're better with numbers. Yeah, so working towards it.
So the only thing, so I'm just going to add with our little flavor, is the subscriptions 1337 does have a slightly different format, just because it is replaying transactions.
What was that number again?
It's 1337. And we're also yeah.
Did you plan that?
Sure. Yeah, we definitely had a script that told us when it was available. No, so the decentralized network is a big problem, but in order to run subscriptions, actually, like as Gitcoin, we're incentivized to make sure our transactions go through, and like it actually gives us a tiny bit of a profit, like when we operate transactions on behalf of our users, or we can just not charge them anything because either we're making money or the people we're connecting and using our platform are making money. So again, it's like there's many flavors of meta transactions, and that's just all I'm trying to convey.
Yeah, that's what's interesting about meta transactions for those who are kind of new to it, is that like it opens up a lot of possibilities, subscriptions being like a really valuable one, because there's so much tokens out there, and we kind of want to unlock these tokens and add more liquidity to the network as well.
Yeah, like meta transactions are really interesting because it allows you to actually, I guess, conduct the transaction for the user itself, and because you're doing it for the user, you can actually experiment with many different interesting business models. I've heard of wallets looking to actually monetize meta transactions and actually see run their own relay, right, server to execute it, but then take a small cut of every transaction for doing so. That's one example, and the subscription would be, I guess, recurring payment model is one as well.
Yeah, like just to add on that, like this Pandora box that you mentioned, this is probably the most like one of the coolest challenges that we have to solve. And like right now we're all here together, so this is one of the points that I like to touch, so we can together think about and discuss further. It's like the economical models behind the meta transactions, because like we're creating this thing that we're assuming, okay, we now can allow users to basically transact without having to have gas. And we come in with the assumption that is already created without really putting an insane amount of thought yet that, all right, where does this gas came from? It's like, it comes from the relay. But why is the relay doing this? What we're doing, like some of the hypotheses, some of the kind of analysis that we created. Okay, number one, the relay can get rewarded in any ERC20 in one of the use cases, in the sense that, all right, I'm a user, I'm using this multi-sig wallet or so, and I'm not paying for gas, but I'm paying some cut of this transaction, and this is going to the relay so he can get rewarded. And another one is that like, all right, and this relay not only get the reward from the ERC20, but also gets a newly minted token. This is like what we're trying to implement our token to kind of fix into the system as what people call in desktop mining. So instead of hunting for like the hashes, you're hunting actually for the transactions that you're going to relay. But there's a lot of still challenges, like when you look at the numbers of like, all right, how can we guarantee that somehow the relayer in a decentralized way gets rewarded in a way that he's incentivized to keep doing this and doing more transactions, providing more liquidity for the network.
So one thing I think someone over there mentioned was the problem that, like, if you have a meta transaction, you only want it to get executed once, but if you have a whole network of relays, you may have like 20 different sort of relay nodes trying to submit a single transaction, of which only one will succeed and the rest will presumably fail and consume some gas, and presumably only the one that succeeds will get rewarded with whatever the token is. So one thing I is like on the kind of economic incentives around that, right? Given that I know when I submit a transaction, I may not succeed, and I might not get a reward. Like, how, does that just have to sort of be built into the profit margin of successful ones, or do you keep some portion back to refund failed transactions, and whether there's any kind of consensus or some standardized way to deal with that problem?
Yeah. Do you have a solution to this technical problem?
Do I have a solution? Well, I mean, no, I don't, I mean, it's something I think about. I know the Chronologic guys have done some stuff where some portion of the money kind of gets, some portion of like the fee for the transactions kept aside to like refund the failed transactions, but obviously there's some kind of scaling issues there. I don't know exactly technically how. Yeah. And I guess the other solution is to let these relayers coordinate in some way so that only one relayer actually tries to submit it, and then, but you know, how you manage that coordination, how you make sure you deal with bad actors and stuff like that is
so that's something.
Maybe later we can share what we
I mean, that's one of the things MetaCartel is working on, but oftentimes we talk about, I guess, the use of meta-transaction in a separate context as in context of the, I guess, the crypto economics of designing a decentralized relay network. Because I guess if you look at it right now, most applications don't need a decentralized relay; they just need to conduct meta-transaction at the moment. And if you actually look at the specific, I guess, product requirements and actually properties of what people need the relay server to do, right? I mean, people value, I guess, when I talk to different teams, people value reliability, uptime, I guess. And if you think about it, it's not that bad if the relay server fails. Yes, you know, you can't conduct a meta transaction, but you know, it's not like it's securing state. So currently that's one of the aspects is just exploring, you know, from a product perspective, what do teams need? You know, it looks like a lot of teams just need really good software that can do this really well. And I guess the reliability and P2P resiliency, it's actually a sought after factor, especially if teams like, let's say you're running a wallet, you know, you actually want to invest money into maintaining the reliability, if not enforcing that, and potentially a decentralized network can provide that. You know, if not many decentralized networks at the same time, because reliability can be broken in so many ways, it's just unpredictable.
So I have actually one quick suggestion for the thing you're describing. You can basically imagine having your own contract, the relayer, their own contract wallet, where they queue up meta transactions. And if everyone used the same one, whoever kind of paid that next one, the contract enacts upon your behalf. That way you're sure only one thing ever executed it. No one's going to try to jump into the queue, or that was the only place those meta transactions were allowed to be executed from. Maybe if meta transactions require the from address being from this like super contract, then you can be assured that there's never, the worst case you're going to do is if the queue is empty, you might lose a little bit of gas because it was empty, but probably once it's close to empty, no one would be willing to front the gas to trigger the next transaction.
So you mean when a relayer is executing a meta transaction, they're not executing an explicit one, they're just saying, I want to execute the next one.
Next meta transaction and actually execute one if there's one in the queue, but if there's already somebody, if it's already drained, there's no point.
I guess, I mean, I suppose, so if meta transactions have different, like some are like large transactions and some, you know, some they have different kind of gas requirements.
So that would come from the person calling the mega thing.
But then again, are you suggesting having a pool of meta transactions that is shared between all of the relayers?
Or even on chain.
Or even on chain.
You can imagine,
so the super contract for the relayer network would have this message queue.
That's inefficient. If you have like calling data, like if you call a contract, like let's assume we support all transactions, also create transaction, storing them on chain is like, why would you do that? Like that's the whole point why we moved actually from the multisig, from the old Gnosis multisig, where like you stored all of the transaction information on chain, to the new multisig where we only store the hash on chain and all the real information of the transaction are stored. Like you have to share them off chain with all your peers because it's just transaction cost less, like 10 times less. And if you ask your users between like, okay, you have to pay €5 to execute a transaction versus 50 cents, they will not pay €5 for a transaction. Like that's, we just have to face that. Like even right now, a transaction costs like 10 cents, and the gas prices and the ether prices are pretty low right now. Like if we imagine both go up by 10 times, like that just not be feasible.
You know, which also raises another thing that we're kind of thinking about, the whole problem of abuse. Like what happens, we want to, like the use case we see is the user signs up to using one of the simple ways he can do that, and then he has a problem that he wants to just sign something and you want the relayer to pay for it. So how do you prevent abuse where someone who wants to, you know, he doesn't gain anything from it, but he can abuse the system and create a lot of users, and then how do you stop that fraud? How do you stop that problem? And I'm just wondering, like, what are your thoughts on stuff like that?
There are two actual use cases, different flavors of what you said. There are First is when you have a dishonest attacker that already has an identity contract that is trying to just game the system and just drain the relayers out.
Yeah, that's a bit easier to handle.
Yeah, and the second one is actually maybe a question that we have discussed in MetaCartel, but if not, everyone is here, is how do you even get identity proxy if the assumption is that you don't have either and you're willing to, you want to use meta transactions for better user experience, but in order for you to start having better user experience, you need to still go and do the bad things. So how do you do this?
Exactly. So we're actually envisioning a place where nobody's even knows they're using this application, right? They're just, universal login, whatever, they're just using it. But that means there was a single meta transaction, they're probably being sponsored by someone. So what prevents someone like creating 1 million users and just killing the relayers.
Which basically is schedule attack.
So yeah, so that's something we're also looking into how we can actually, detect that fraud. But it's a difficult problem.
I think it's like a different problem. It's like a traditional fraud problem that any app has. You kind of need to solve before you sponsor a few transactions for them. You need to do phone number verification or some way to reduce that. Just like any other app would want to kind of reduce fraud and fake accounts. I think it's kind of separate from the meta transaction question, although it is very relevant for anyone looking to sponsor some meta transactions for their users.
Yeah, but then I'm sure we're discussing almost the relevance of meta transaction in this thing, because when you talk about the identity contract in the beginning, if the cost of it, comparing to the Web 2.0, the cost of having a server, a new user, someone spending is virtually nothing. But when you talk about meta transactions, 10 cents for each spam that goes there, even more than 10 cents, it can get insane. In a few hours, you can lose the whole system in terms of gas. And just to illustrate, we put up one of the most used faucets in the network, and we had thousands of clicks per day. And then as soon as our faucet kind of got all right, there's a lot of people using, it just started to get drained. Literally, every time they'll just put some ETH inside, just out. And there's we start to talk with the other faucets in the space, and everybody was having the same problem. So it's just as you said, I agree that it's a problem that it's somehow different. But if we don't solve this problem, everything else is almost irrelevant.
So with that, just for me to understand, so that when your faucet was being drained, it wasn't that someone was able to extract that ether for their own use, it's more that they were griefing you and kind of making you waste that.
Yes.
There was no incentive, the person doing it, or the individual doing it, or whatever the actor doing it, wasn't gaining themselves other than by the fact they were irritating you or griefing you.
Yes, for the if the DApp sponsor the gas, because someone is going to sponsor the gas, it's for the relayers, and it probably will be the DApp. So then you're griefing a DApp, which is sounds very dangerous.
I guess this is it's like asymmetric thing in the sense that the attacker it's not like the attacker's getting either.
No, well, it could be another DApp which wants to, he's gaining from the fact that now that DApp is lost their gas. So.
There may be some
basically a DOS attack, right? If you think about a traditional denial of service attack, you also, as an attacker, don't gain anything. Right. But you're denying the service the same time.
If you can do it, and I was good work. You should do it, is because if we cannot protect ourselves, you should do it. It's just for any debt, it's just gonna happen.
It's too technical, I may not go into it.
Please go into it.
Right, so to your remark that somebody else should be paying for your layers gas, yes and no. Yes, somebody else then the relayer should be paying for the user's contract, and no, the user is the one that should be paying for this. And now the question is, how do you make a user that does not have an ether or anything that's payable to actually be able to pay for their own smart contract? And here lies an interesting concept that we implemented both in our solution and in Universal SDK, which we called counterfactual instantiation, and this is not something that we came up with. It's coming out of L4's counterfactual style smart contracts paper. Maybe most of you know it, but the idea behind this very funny sounding word counterfactual means that something is there, something is not there, but there is the distinct possibility of being there if somebody decides to exercise it. So how does this translate in meta transactions? So we have figured out a way for the relayer to deterministically find the address of a contract that is going to be the contract of you, the user, without actually creating a transaction and without having all the problems of figuring out addresses, because currently it's kind of easy to figure out what the address of the next contract is going to be, because it's based on the wallet that's signing plus the nonce. However, if you have a relayer network, you don't know exactly which nonce you're going to use for each user, so we had to do a little bit more magic. I can talk more about it if it's interesting to anyone, but basically the main idea is that basically all the relayers can now have and share with each other the address where the user's contract is going to be. Not necessarily is, but is going to be. And only once the user actually decides to do something meaningful, and meaningful in the context of relayer means something that is going to pay me back my money that I will spend for deploying this contract, only then this transaction goes through.
Who will pay you back?
The user.
But the user doesn't, but we're
The
talking
user-
about
so-
the Ethernet
yeah.
onboarding, so nobody's paying AWS fees. The user won't pay a transaction fee if you were talking mainstream adoption. So how will the user actually pay it? Where is the money coming
We're
from?
talking about how to use MetaTransaction in a very, very generalized way, which we don't have any context with each individual project. MetaTransactions are simply a tool which allows you to abstract gateway and pay for and maybe also pay for the user's transactions. And with each project, it depends, I guess, depends how you use MetaTransaction. It depends on the weight of importance of actually having your transaction to be mainnet on-chain, or just simply mainnet, or completely abstracted away. And it almost feels like there needs to be a design system on how to use MetaTransactions, which looks into the importance of your on-chain transaction, and how you're looking to, and what are the goals of using MetaTransactions, Otherwise, we know that, because all of that, I guess, issues such as KYC will depend on that, and maybe you might want to use MetaTransactions to give people free transactions, and you might do it on a test net, and then counterfactually, deploy it later on, or allow the user to deploy their identity contract on, say, mainnet, as an upgrade for security reasons, I've heard of a wallet where basically exists on the POA chain, and allows you to, it's a wallet that receives, DAI on the POA chain, but it's very cheap to send it. So I guess the onboarding friction is fairly low there, and it allows, the user to send DAI on the POA chain using the DAI itself through Relay. So the Relay takes DAI tokens as payment. And essentially this wallet allows the user to actually upgrade onto main chain to increase security. We've been thinking about on-chain, off-chain security in a very black and white way, but I think it can be it's a spectrum, of how secure do you want your funds to be. And yeah, I think that's a very interesting way and it shows the complex dynamic of how it can be applied and the nuance it needs to be applied with, right? Rather than just thinking, okay, KYC, there's a spectrum of KYC to passport, are you a robot, And I guess, so you can be used in a very interesting way. It's just I think design system, if not a series of interviews that could kick this off, would be very interesting to think about, if not begin.
Getting meta for a second, what are the goals of this meeting? Because I feel like we could talk about this and then, are we trying to produce something, or are we just chatting to try and come to kind of consensus of what everyone's doing?
So this is one of the first offline meetups for MetaCartel, and we have initiatives running in the MetaCartel, and I kind of let this conversation run just to have a feel on what is everyone doing and what are the questions that naturally occur and rise out of here. That's why I wanted to be a fairly flexible thing. And I guess I came into this meeting with the intention of what do we want to achieve, what are the problems we want to achieve, and I guess this discussion kind of led to several problems being highlighted, and I want to see how we can actually come together to help each other in some way, shape, or form. And I guess I want to direct most of the activity online, and this is more getting to meet each other and more contextual inquiry into things. So the MetaCartel was started in mid-September. This was shortly after ETH Berlin. So essentially a lot of people in this community have learned about MetaTransaction since EdCon Toronto from the 1077 ERC 1077/78 video by Van de Sand. I guess interest grew from there, and at ETH Berlin, it was really when everyone started to come together from, as established by, like, I guess, Golem's workshop on meta-transactions. There was a lot of interest. This group grew from there to really, firstly, standardize the contract interface that we're going to use, or at least, as well as the UX UX system that we're going to use to apply meta-transactions, because it is standard. I guess it's a UX standard that spans across several standards itself, and may also interact with further standards such as 1377. No, 1337. Yeah, at least. And so far, we began. And as we also started to talk about other aspects of meta-transactions, such as the decentralized relay network. So currently, we have two tracks, or two main focuses for the MetaCartel. And first one is standardization. On the 27th of September, we actually came together for our first meeting to talk about standardization. We set a goal of actually creating a draft of the contracts interface standard by DevCon. So we're going to have a private roundtable, I guess, kind of like a MetaCartel kind of offline table to kind of finalize our contract draft by day within DevCon. And what that will
so you mean like an ERC when you say contract?
Correct. Whether we're going to stick with 1077 or create a new ERC. And we've been developing the standard for over the last month, since September. And I guess we're going to, after the draft has been published, we will release it out to the public where it will be contested. And I just want to get more eyes on it and yeah, have an open forum for it.
So there's the ERC process, I guess. It's not necessarily a terrible thing to publish a relatively early draft, right? Because if you want to get commentary on it and eyes on it and stuff like that, I mean, publishing, even if you're maybe not 100% sure about everything, but publishing on ERC, and you get lots of eyes, you get lots of developers looking at it and picking holes in it, or whatever, suggesting improvements, or saying, or whatever, right? So I don't know, I mean, it sounds like maybe you're trying to get something which is pretty finished, where you have a kind of basic implementation, etc., before you kind of do your big kind of...
DevCon is 3-4 days away. We're yet to really finalize the draft. We're going to release it then. And we've only had one real meeting to actually have a chat about the draft itself. We've had some conversation on GitHub, and it's really involved 3 or 4 people of other interests. So it's actually fairly imperfect, hence I'm just trying to blast out the word about this. And I'll kind of, I guess, all of this will happen mainly online, which I'll point you all directly towards later on. But the other track is for the Crypto Economics Research Lab that we're kind of setting up, the Cartel Research Task Force, right? So we're mainly actually focused on actually designing a decentralized relay network to support meta-transactions and to increase the P2P resiliency of the network, reliability of it, and as well as to research various economical models to, I guess, design this network around. One of our current focuses right now for the research lab is understanding how does EIP 859 influence it. Essentially, if you're in 2.0, because essentially, this EIP 859 will influence is about count abstraction, where counts will be treated the same as contracts, not just single keys. And that's ongoing at the moment, and it will influence the roadmap of several, like 3 to 4 teams' progress on the relay network. These are the 2 tracks we've been mainly focusing on, and I would just love to talk about what else might we want to actually focus on, to look at maybe business models. Maybe it's understanding or beginning designing say a design system and how to use meta-transactions. But what we can offer right now, right, in terms of the cartel, is a forum for discussion, as well as several individual members, several teams within the cartel who are already well-versed in integrating the meta-transaction flow and universal logins kind of flow within existing products. So we'll actually begin to do that and have a lot of teams begin that process. And secondly, we do have the product people within this group talking to a lot of people and a lot of projects looking to use meta-transactions. I believe many of you can actually gain from talking to or having a quick conversation with that. Namely, I don't know, me, because I've been just talking to everyone, and I do have a lot of notes based on every team I talk to on how they want to use it, the nuances they want to use it. And yeah, like we do have Alex Vanasan and Marek from ETHWorks within the group championing and building universal logins as well. So yeah, it's a pretty cool place. And I guess you can kind of go and join the MetaCartel by going to metatx.fun. This will lead you to our GitHub, and you'll find everything you need to know there. From communications to what is a MetaCartel to code of conduct, right? And yeah, I'd like to just open up the rest of today's discussion for the next 15 minutes, just discuss about, to open it up to see if anyone else wants to talk about anything else.
I think just like for us to have also some tangible outcomes, we could try to list together, as even you said, Peter, like the biggest problems that we have right now, so we can all kind of think together and like further develop like on the following weeks and everything. And I think like that would be something that would be good to work on, and just like for us to literally list what are the biggest challenges right now, what is like the obstacles that we're gonna face somehow together to build the whole network and like to build everything. One is like just the whole economical model behind it, like who pays for the gas and how does it work. The other was like, all right, you have the deterministic thing. Like I also love to hear more about that, like to understand how does it work. And yeah, just like this is what I think would be like relevant for us to do right now.
Yeah, I think sorry, but one thing that we should continue from here, because I think it's the most tangible outcome, is because we talk meta transactions is mostly based around UX. So the user has to go from not knowing anything about blockchain to interacting with the dApp. And this is kind of where we're at the moment. The first implementation is going to be a single centralized relayer, because that's where the furthest thing to production is at the moment, and that's where some teams are stopping. So it'd be interesting to hear where like 1337, where Gnosis Safe is with the user journey. Like how does a user go from, like are you targeting users that aren't in the blockchain space, or like how do users come and get to the point where they start interacting with the blockchain without like, you know, having private keys or having an account?
I can give a short overview for the Safe. So basically our target is actually, we have 3 personas. The personas we are mainly targeting as a newbie who should not know about gas and all these abstractions. Also for us, we implemented also this deployment of the contract without the user having to own another external account. So basically I think it's a similar process, we just generate a transaction to determine the address, and then the user sends an ERC20 token or Ether there, so he just needs to know his safe address, the one that will be in the future the safe address. Funds the safe address, and then it's created, and we keep the flow to the minimum there. We don't talk about addresses, we abstract away addresses. Like we have multiple owners, we have our phone and a Chrome extension, but we never expose addresses, we just talk about these devices like you would do it normally with any non-Web3 DApp. And then when you have it set up, you see your Ether, but you don't know that it is in a contract necessarily. You know that you have Ether, that's your one account that you manage with your multiple devices, and then in this flow, when you see it, you see your costs of the Ether, but we never say these are gas costs or how they really originated, because under the hood there's right now for us a lot going on how these gas costs are calculated. Like we have the gas price, and you can use an ERC20 token to pay, but for the user it's just, that's what you have to pay for the transaction. And then you can submit it. So for us we try to really abstract away everything that is too specific besides, this is your currency, you have to pay this much in your currency to get your transaction executed. And yeah, we have, like you said, we have a centralized instance running of our relay service on Rinkeby and on mainnet. So actually, like the next step for us is to get that live on mainnet, which is planned at the end of November, so that this super simplified flow would work already. But then the next step would be to get maybe decentralized.
I was just wondering, is that open source? Like, did we take a look at this?
So this is all open source. If you go to the Gnosis company repo, there you will find the safe contract, where you will find the contract. Actually, if you go to the MetaCartel site,
the great the MetaCartel wiki, right? Which you can do like going here. You can find a list of all the implementations of everything. MetaTX.fun.
Actually, part of this, there we have we created a truffle box where you check out the truffle box, go through the README, you basically see which are the endpoints for our Rinkeby relay service. You can just switch it out for our mainnet endpoint service. I don't think they are secret, so So if you would ask for them, somebody would tell them to you. But I would normally try to stay on Rinkeby for now. It's just more secure.
And if you have your own implementations or any other projects that might fit on the wiki, just feel free to edit and throw them up there.
And a user journey on the 1337.
Yeah, so Gitcoin kind of has, it's two-part answer. So with 1337, the UX advancement is that a user doesn't have to press the send button every time they are sending money, actually, like money is being transferred from their wallet. So this aspect is expecting people to have a wallet and kind of know what Ether is, ERC20 is, etc. But down the path of abstracting gas away from a user, right? So Gitcoin has the experience of technical people coming to Gitcoin in order to fulfill bounties, writing code for open source projects, right? And so in order to start work, you don't have to have a wallet. Right now, the user journey is that once you get paid out, that's when you have to go through the education experience, right? And so you're already incentivized to go through the education experience because you already have value waiting for you on the other side. And so that's kind of the same carrot we want to use with gasless transactions, is that like, okay, we'll pay some transactions for you to get into the system, and then once you are familiar with how it all works, at some point we're going to cut you off, and then you have to go through that education process, learn what a wallet is, what an Ether is, what a ERC20 is, and then you can move forward into the ecosystem from there. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's very good, because there's 3 implementations that are the kind of like what are spearheading this space at the moment, and those to see if it's done well with like implementing applications like the mobile wallet that kind of, it's like, you know, you download a mobile wallet and then you start interacting with it, which is something that is people are used to in the technology space or just in the general consumer space. But another interesting one is universal logins implementation.
Yeah.
Which you can talk through the user journey. I don't know if you want to go through it, George, or I can kind of spin.
Part of 2 implementations actually. Okay. So one is probably my own, or at least line chains, and I just explained it like it's the general meta transactions where we have the identity and you just go through and we focus more on the counterfactual transactions and making the Relay network as safe as possible and as secure as possible, but still without the ability to exploit the user. And about the universal identity, we actually implemented this in the Universal SDK. So the Universal SDK is currently working with a single centralized relayer, and everything else is just as we discussed it here. I mean, you have the SDK where it allows you to just create identity. The relayer is going to create your identity, and you can continue working forward with this identity. And the demonstration application basically is one where the dApp, which is like Twitter-like dApp, sends you tokens, and you're basically paying the relayer back with tokens. So yeah, pretty much this is it.
Yeah, I have a question. Like, what does it mean to have a decentralized layer of relayers? Because I think decentralized has too many aspects related to it, and when we go decentralized, we have the costs to it. If we are talking about a consensus, traditional consensus mechanism, are we talking about a decentralized list of available relayers, which I think makes sense, or a decentralized mechanism around relayers to execute a specific transaction?
So single relay itself will be hosted by potentially yourself or someone else. And I guess the next stage would be to have a network of relays that conduct these transactions. And I guess I think decentralization really means whether the network itself has open participation in it.
Yeah. So it's more about availability to execute a transaction.
And also rewards, the distribution of rewards of the network.
And censorship for different reasons. I think Status has in the wiki has a really nice example where they have a really similar flow like we do. We are familiar with our flow, so where you can basically you ask a gas price from the network. Then when you have the gas price, you can submit the transaction, and they do that all via Whisper.
which is really interesting because there it's basically you just push out a message asking you like into the group like, hey, who can execute a transaction for me? Then like you get multiple responses with like, I executed for this gas price and this gas price, and then you pick one, open up a private Discord channel with that one, and send him this transaction. In this case, it's also this little bit like, it's a two-step, it's not this traditional one-step thinking, you just submit it, you have a two-step approach there, but there you also, basically in this transaction, you could actually encode that only you get paid, and therefore you would kind of don't have this problem of, oh, but if I submit it, everybody can see the transaction and everybody can execute it because you put it into the transaction who is actually receiving this reward. But that would require these two steps, and also there it's a question, what happens if I submit you the transaction and you don't execute it at all, right? Like, then it's I think also another like plasma insights is the data availability problem, right? You cannot prove that, I cannot prove that I gave the data to him, like it's kind of hard to prove that. So well, how could he be punished for not sending my transaction?
So 10-minute time check, so you're welcome to roll over to lunch, but at 1 p.m. lunch starts.
A lot of, just looking there, a lot of economic problems are defined on GitHub.
Yep. It's not only availability, it's censorship again.
Yeah. Like he could always say, that's the cheapest gas price, takes all the transaction but never executes. And then he starts like maintaining whitelists and platelets, and like how can you make this like, easy?
This is why I said it's basically opposite. We have a whole another Pandora's box. I mean, just think where we started, where we are now.
We do have a separate kind of whole team gathering together to solve these design mechanism problems.
I have one consideration. So we're mostly talking about the transactions that's supposed to be executed on spot, right? So now, and this is fairly easy to achieve. And the thing with, for instance, with the subscriptions and what we're doing at the Ethereum LARPOC is scheduling transactions. So you add the dimension of the time to this whole equation. And that's actually where things are actually getting a little bit more interesting. And I think meta transaction should handle and should support this kind of things as well. And maybe, for instance, if you want to schedule something like in 1 year, then how you put like a gas price for this execution, right? How do you know that? So there's like a mechanism that you can improve some probability of like, doing this. And with the relayers network is that how do you make sure that the relayer, for instance, who says like I'm gonna execute is gonna be actually available in 1 year, right? So there are like different dimensions with the time that we obviously exploring and have some implementation for that. It's not strictly on the meta transaction because our approach is slightly different, but definitely I think it's a good way to like look into this. And if we want to make things a little bit more complicated even more, then we should add something like a conditional execution, which is again like an absolutely different thing because then you need to have a proofs. I mean something that you can prove that the execution should happen because some other conditions are met. It might be based on events, EVM events, or EVM state. EVM state is actually hard to prove that there was a state, at some certain times. But like, so what I try to say is like I would mix the time and the conditional execution, the whole thing.
Cool. I think, any different question?
Yeah, I guess like a quick question about I guess like business model. And disclaimer, this might be like a stupid question, but like, would it make sense to maybe propose different, I guess, similar to mining pools, but just like relayer pools based on the sorts of apps and the sorts of, I guess, like projected throughput based on the type of app? Because like if you're running like decentralized Twitter versus, I don't know, like a decentralized like D&D or something like that, they're gonna have completely different like throughputs, and therefore like you create like a group of people saying, hey, our types of apps have this projected throughput, this is how much we're going to kind of like pay, and just like, you either figure out whether or not that payment comes from the user itself or just from the business, and then if there's a surplus in gas at the end of the month, we're going to split it based on certain parameters, either like split it equally based on the number of people, split it based on the number of transactions or whatever like that. So that way,
I think that brings up an important point. Like, how decentralized does it actually need to be? Like, to a point where it's not centralized within each company, like where Gitcoin has to run its own server and submit these transactions on its behalf. Like, yeah, we're incentivized to do that, but it might be nice to put it on a decentralized network.
But does it really need to be like a whole global network, or does it just need to be decentralized enough to where there's like 10 parties possible?
Yeah. Yes. So I think that's a really good thing to discuss because we have those two approaches. I think that was discussed here. Centralized relayers, meaning that's like whatever company that's providing the service around the relayer. But then obviously there is this trouble of trust. I think. I mean, might be a trouble of the trust model. If it's like PayPal facilitating payment, but actually they can censor whatever parties they want, right? So the question is whether the company that provides you some functionality should also support these meta transactions. On the other hand, the alternative option is like the centralized network, but actually this comes obviously at cost because it's much harder to incentivize this network to exist, right? Because if you have like 10 nodes, the question is how many transactions they will facilitate, because if you need to keep up 10 nodes, it means like 10 times the cost of one node, obviously, right?
I think one thing is important. When you have this transaction, everyone can actually execute it. Like this is like something should be cornerstone. So it's like an open. It can be done by someone else, but it should be also possible to be done by user itself. So just picking its own transaction, executing and paying for it as being like an external party. So
yes, it is. So by default, I think all these meta transactions are possible to be executed by whoever.
Exactly.
So there can be even you can do that for you.
Censored by someone else. That's my point. Like,
yeah, but it's always that there is this UX consideration when we have, things that are easier for the users, so they don't need to think too much. And obviously, the equilibrium for this is a centralized relayer, because that's the easiest and the cheapest one, right? The question is like how we choose or how people can, do they have a choice, or let's say, I don't want to be relayed by this relayer, I want to be relayed by something more maybe reliable.
I think there was a point of the cost which is very important for the mass adaptation. So basically any type of decentralized solution costs more than if it will be distributed, for example, that has been mentioned.
Does it really? That was for me, there also we had two considerations. One of the things from us as Gnosis right now we have to spin up our own services. We also have to take the cost and putting Whisper on top of it. Normally it's more a time constraint, because you having direct communication is a little bit faster than having decentralized communication. But also for us, it's actually, if we want to go to China now, release the wallet there, we have to spin up new services because our EU services will not work in China. So we have to then manage to, for us actually, it's more costly than trying to actively support a decentralized network that is available.
But again, I was thinking about mutually exclusive options. That's my point. Having a distributed solution is not actually saying we should not have a decentralized. So my point is having a distributed solution will help to drive this cost down, which is very important for the mass adaptation. Otherwise, we are not going to.
Also, with mass adaptation, for me, always is interesting to see, right? If you go to a supermarket and pay with your Visa card, you don't pay. There are some smaller stores that make you pay for that, but normally in a bigger supermarket, you don't pay these 50 cents or something to pay with your Visa card. It's you could see with meta transactions would be you go to a supermarket, you pay with your wallet, and what you do actually, you just hand off your signed transaction to the supermarket and then submit it so that the supermarket pays for.
Yeah, it's just like giving a check.
Yeah, and I think that is also something which right now might not be happening, but it's something that meta transaction.
Even in comparison to PayPal, by the way, so that it's a centralized service that PayPal can censor, and obviously that's true. But on the other hand, the barrier to entry here is much lower than PayPal. If you want to become PayPal right now, you need to talk to the credit companies. It's a whole mess. Here you just have to spin up some servers and have some ether. So maybe that problem of, if someone starts censoring, fine, then we don't use you. You use one of the millions other centralized services without all the costs, obviously. So
sure.
It's semi-decentralized in a sense.
That was kind of what I was thinking too, how decentralized does it need to be, right?
Yeah. What's the answer? Because
and I think all of the above.
Guys, I think we just kind of wrap up. But one thing that I don't think anyone discussed this is the liability problem for the relayers, right? So if nodes is running their own nodes, can they be liable for not relaying this transaction, right?
Yeah,
what about the centralized actually setup is this is like a plausible deniability thing, right? Because they don't know what they rely on. They have no really any liability. I don't think we kind of catch all these laws and liability things at all in the communities. But that's gonna be very necessary.
Touch on more, just
that's gonna be necessary.
Like the product requirements of this decentralized network. How important is P2P resiliency? How important is reliability? How can reliability be threatened? How can P2P resiliency be threatened? Cost factors. What are these different factors influenced by? And
I think he's talking about liability rather than reliability.
No, yeah, liability from the perspective. So I think like this is similar to the Tor network, architecture. Obviously the Lightning follows the Tor network, as well. So these, if you are the Tor network node, you don't have any liability, I guess, right? Because you don't really know this anonymous or
It's interesting as well because at this hackathon, someone implemented a solution where they use meta transactions to do anonymous transactions, but then at that point, because the address, the message sender address isn't preserved, he just uses the relay as address to be like the from sender.
Exactly.
So,
that was one of the questions you asked.
Relayer is buying a bunch of drugs.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is a problem we run into a lot building Groundhog. And so we've gotten some legal input from a number of different firms in the US right now. And there is an argument to be made that as a relayer, you're technically a money services business. And so that is a huge area right now we're trying to avoid. So they say if you're implementing fiat or you have fiat on-ramps or off-ramps in your system, you're almost guaranteed to be an MSB. But now, like with us, we're completely non-custodial. Our goal is to just operate, decentralized nodes. But if you are a centralized authority and they can point to you, depending on your jurisdiction, you may have to go through significant MSB laws, and they can be the tune of like $2 to $3 million in order to get properly accredited. So it's like where you're located and where your services are run definitely makes for a really interesting legal landscape. So
where is best?
Where is best right now? Friendly hubs, so Malta, for instance, would be like really feeling towards it. Probably Hong Kong, Japan, since currency is illegal there.
Like anything in Europe?
What's the rate?
Anything in Europe?
Not that I know of in terms of like
Estonia maybe?
What's the rate?
Yeah,
Gibraltar actually might be pretty friendly. What's one? I think it was Belize that came out and said that they're like super crypto friendly. They're allowing you to like have like tax free for 5-10 years or something.
What's that here?
I think Belize might be one.
Belarus.
Yeah.
You can also check Estonia. I know that some of our stuff because it's easier to break the limit there if you run around.
One of the things that a decentralized node of relayers gets you though is like payment neutrality. So one of the things where we talk about net neutrality a lot and the frequent have your packets moved. Well, blockchains enable the idea of like payment neutrality, but it's still like a manual process to go through that. And so when you get to like meta transactions and that idea of a better user experience, kind of brings that to the forefront.
So with those conversations, I guess this is kind of like a bigger in scope question, but like if hypothetically some meta transaction capability was like somehow implemented in Ethereum at large, right? Like, and if there was a means or like an agreed upon either protocol or series of protocols where you could just like similar to like an API or an RPC or whatever, you send a side or something, like if this capability were integrated into Ethereum itself, would that like risk of, I guess, being deemed a money services business be kind of like abstracted into the protocol at large?
I'm not a lawyer, but I would say that likely. So a good argument is for Ethereum and a lot of its properties is that it is highly decentralized. So it's really hard to like hold any one individual accountable for the actions of the network. Hard to hold the network accountable for any one individual actions of the user. But I think the legal question just kind of comes down to when you have a single entity that is responsible, or even not even a single one. It's until you have a large swath of decentralization, I think you're still going to have issues with money services business. Now that being said, though, there could be some, the legal landscape is rapidly changing in this regard. The U.S. Security Exchange and Commodities Trade Association, or when did they, CMTC, anyways, they said that cryptocurrencies are likely going to fall under commodities, which may exempt certain requirements and may also impose some other ones.
Yeah.
Quick little, I guess, like plug. I mean, this is less of what we're talking about here, but more of like a security token stack deal. I think, like, I kind of read over the CFTC thing, and I'm like friends with my company's lawyers, and they're into crypto, so I can ask them these questions. But like, it seems like the crux of the CFTC's argument with regards to smart contracts was just like people using words that are like literally like dog whistles for financial services language. Like if we stop, or not stop, but just mitigate that, I think you could like attract a lot less regulatory attention.
Can you give a few examples?
Smart contracts. like within the CFTC's like most recent like document, they said like, this is called a smart contract. Normally contracts are this, this, and this. Well, if they're gonna call themselves a smart contract, and if our jurisdiction is about like contracts that execute like financial transfers, then they're basically saying by like the Ethereum community's own like words, they put themselves in our jurisdiction. You know what I mean? So I'm not saying, you know, dodge regulations. I'm not an effing lawyer, right? But like, I get there can be this kind of incentive to borrow terminologies like dividends and shit like that. But like, I guess just be careful, you know? Like, some word that might be used like super often in financial services is probably a very regulated word, and just putting that here, putting that there, so ROI, return on investment, shit like that will like attract the people that maybe you didn't have higher orders to like mitigate that your protocol, your program, or your DApp is like resistant.
Well, utility token and they won't notice. Just call it a utility token and then fly under the radar.
Alright. So it looks like we're gonna wrap up the session. Those will be uploaded online. Check out our website and GitHub. I expect a blog post to be posted within the next week, recapping today's session and call. The video will be uploaded and join the content.